Good morning, and welcome to Ed's World, where it's always morning, even in the afternoon. I'm Jay Edgar, and I was fortunate enough today to be joined by the wonderful JJ Lahey. JJ, welcome to Ed's World.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Real pleasure to be here.
Before we get started here, I've got a little bit of announcement that I want to make sure that we make because the time is drawn nigh, and it's going to be just a few days now until I am having my epic gun control debate with Robert from the Generational Gap for charity. Make sure that you take some time and tune into the Generational Gap this coming Friday starting at noon Eastern Time. That's 11 o'clock my time. To see them talk about the issues, have a bunch of great guests, and raise a bunch of money for St. Jude's. At 6 o'clock Central Time, I will be joining the show to have a 2-hour debate, Lincoln Douglas style, with Robert, because we both agree that the Second Amendment is important, but we tend to disagree on what it means in the modern world. And I think it's going to be a great time. I've got a lot of respect for both these men, and I'm glad they're going to welcome me onto their show, and I look forward to having the argument. Before we get started here, let's take a look at what we're going to be talking about today. We can't sit back and ignore the fact that Julian Assange got arrested. He got kicked out of the Ecuadorian embassy and maybe extradited back to the U.S. So we'll talk a bit about that. Ilhan Omar is back in the news for making comments that she may or may not mean or may not stand by, but we'll talk about the backlash from that. JJ has expressed an interest to me that he is an expert in politics and presidential politics and statistics about that. So, as we always do on Ed's World, we will be taking some time and talking 2020, and I'll kind of let him lead this conversation as opposed to myself leading it as I have in past weeks. So we'll look at that. Trump has made an announcement that he wants to move all illegal immigrants specifically to sanctuary cities and states. There's been immense backlash to that, so we'll talk about that. And we will close out on something I'd hoped to talk about on last week's podcast because it was a little more fresh this time, but many more stories have come out about this now, so we're going to talk about the backlash that happened after Nielsen was fired and some of the things that have been said about her afterwards. It is going to be all this and more on Ed's World. Thanks for taking the time to watch this on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe and leave a comment below. That helps us move up the algorithms. And if you are watching this on, or listening to this rather, back on the audio platforms, make sure you subscribe over there. And if you're on Apple, please give us a 5-star rating and a good review. That also helps us move up the charts. But before we get into topics, after all of that lengthy introduction here, let's talk about the most important part of this episode of Ed's World. JJ, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thanks for having me on, and very kind of you to call me an expert. I think I'd have to get paid to be called an expert, but politics is certainly a passion of mine. I'm a political junkie, avid poll watcher, and running the numbers on candidates is a full-time hobby of mine for sure. I do need to figure out a way to monetize that so I can do that full-time. Yeah, I'm on Twitter at JJ Lahey, Lahey, and I like to talk about politics, specifically elections. I really like I get just a high off of trying to figure out who's going to do well where, and who's ahead at any point in time, looking at fundraising and polls and stuff like that. It's a big passion of mine. I also like to show up on the No Gimmicks Podcast with Brady Leonard from time to time. Gives me an opportunity to kick around different numbers there with Brady, especially because he and I have a lot of disagreements about different candidates. So it's kind of fun there, but it's a bit about me.
We've had Brady over here before, too, and that happened to be the week that my microphone crapped out, and I was actually feeding the Hangout with the onboard microphone on my laptop. He couldn't even warn me that it was happening, so it was a rough episode, but we got through, and he had some good insight, so I was really happy to have him on. Before we go any further, one question that I love to ask everybody who's ever been on this show, because we all have a different answer and we all seem to wind up in the same place. How did you get into doing alternative media, going from being a consumer of the news into being a commenter on that?
I guess I first got into podcasts when I was a kid, probably about 12 is when I started listening to podcasts. And my dad really is the one who got me into that. And toward the end of my high school years, my dad and I actually started a podcast together called Man Cave Radio. We don't do it anymore, but we had a lot of fun doing that. And so I just kind of caught the bug at that point that I kind of liked, having a soapbox to talk from and to voice some of my ideas. And so it just was always kind of a natural fit for me to be on Twitter. I read on Quora a lot as well. And certainly would like to, at some point, get another podcast going, where I kind of talk more about politics, kind of in the vein of maybe, the Ben Shapiro show, something like that.
Well, it's an interesting thought. And one of the reasons that actually drew you to me to you, was a shared interest in the Green Bay Packers, which you're not in state, and I thought that you were. But how do you think we're gonna fare this coming year?
Obviously the last 2 years have been a little bit painful to watch as a Packers fan. We're used to winning, and so it's been a little bit rough. I have a lot of faith in our new head coach, Matt LaFleur. I think that he has some good ideas, and I really love his passion for football. And more importantly, I think that the team is really excited about him and excited about the new things he wants to try. And he does have an impressive resume. Yeah. I think that it's really going to be up to Aaron Rodgers to focus the energy of the team and also to develop some better relationships with some of the rookie wide receivers. I think if he can do that, I think we've got a really good chance. We've got a lot of talent at running back. We have some great wide receivers. I'd like to see this team do what they're actually capable of doing. I think that the last 2 years we're not really indicative of the talent that's on the team. I think that the locker room dysfunction kind of played out a bit too much on the field. And I'm looking forward to a little bit more cooperation and shared excitement this year.
That's good. And through whatever anybody said about him, I liked McCarthy. And I remember when he took over, because I started out in this fandom in the Holmgren years, for that matter.
Yeah, Mike McCarthy is a really good guy, and we had some really good years under him. I think that I think everybody agrees that it was time for a change. I don't think that McCarthy was all the problem, but I think that staleness was a problem, and so I think a new face at the head coach position will help that a lot.
We'll have to wait and see. Until then, it's time to enjoy baseball.
Yeah, I didn't grow up a huge baseball fan, but I've been watching it a little more lately and rooting for my home team, the Tigers, because I live in Michigan now just for the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. And it's nice that we have sports year round, because I am, at the end of the day, I'm just a huge football junkie, and so just kind of need something to fill that gap.
Yeah, I didn't really get into baseball either until the 2 years that I lived out in New England, and one of those years happened to be 2007 when the Red Sox won the World Series. So you get swept up in the pageantry, and you find yourself a new non-hometown team. I catch so much flack for that, just being from Wisconsin.
Well, I'm right there with you. I get in a lot of trouble, being a Packers fan here in Michigan. Everybody wants me to root for the Lions, and then even worse, when it comes to college, I'm a Buckeyes fan. So all the Michigan State fans up here really do not like me very much.
Well, now that Sports Center is done, you want to get into topics right away?
Man, I'm so pumped. Let's do this.
All right. To start out with, as we teased in the beginning, Julian Assange was arrested and exported out of the Ecuadorian embassy in England. There are talks that he's going to be extradited to the U.S., and it seems that every commenter has had a comment on this. I don't know exactly where I stand on Julian Assange myself because, in the one vein, he is standing up for free speech, but in the other vein, doing something like he is doing does have the vast potential to put American lives in danger. So I'm kind of on the fence about Assange. Where do you fall on that?
It's this is a little bit trickier of a question than some other whistleblowers. You look at somebody like Daniel Ellsberg, or even Edward Snowden. There, it's really cut and dry and easy for me to side with freedom of information and government transparency. I don't think that those in power should be protected from having their dirty deeds exposed. I think that if you get caught doing something bad, then the person who exposed you really is the hero. That's my opinion. The tricky part with Assange is that there are a lot of questions about the Russian ties with WikiLeaks, and I don't know the truth about that. I don't know the answer. But the part that I can definitively state is that I am a huge supporter of transparency, and I think whistleblowers need to be protected. I think that the press needs to be able to do its job, and the Russian ties just make this a lot muddier and a little bit less clear cut, in terms of right and wrong. I think we need more information about WikiLeaks and Assange, and I know that our intelligence organizations pretty harshly condemn the Russian ties with WikiLeaks.
Well, the thing you keep saying the Russian ties, and I know that was a big thing that was brought up when all of this happened, when the WikiLeaks were brought out, and sure enough, Hillary Clinton talked about it in the debate. But Assange had been on Sean Hannity's show numerous times throughout that particular portion of everything, and he swears up and down that he had nothing to do with Russia. And Hannity was Assange's best friend, and I wasn't really that deep into the news and commenting on the news at the time of the Bush era and whatnot. I was just becoming an adult. I was focusing on other things at the time. But
Sure.
I mean, from what I've heard about what was released about Iraq and the Middle East, people like Hannity would have been Assange's worst enemy when WikiLeaks was starting out and he was dropping that kind of stuff. So that's part of the problem that I see with this, is so many people are changing their minds about the guy. Whether he does something they like or something they hate, he's either a hero or a villain, but they can turn him on a dime.
Well, you know who that kind of reminds me of? That sounds like James Comey. James
Yes.
Comey has been hated by the right and the left over the years, and it kind of just depended. He was just kind of a loose cannon, in whichever direction he was firing in. If that's useful to you, then we're gonna like him. But in regards to these alleged Russian ties, the intelligence communities need to release the information they have on those ties, if they're going to actually prosecute him. If they're going to prosecute him, that's what it needs to be for, not whistleblowing.
And other talks too. I heard just a little bit about this as we were starting out the day today, that now there are people in Britain that don't want to see him get extradited at all, that they're going to stand up in his defense for that and keep him from getting sent over. Do you think he gets sent over here or not, first off?
I think probably he does. I think it might take a while, but I think eventually he will. And part of that has to do with apparently the reason that Ecuador finally gave him up is apparently he's a very difficult person. The reports are that Assange's living habits in the embassy were not something that the ambassador and the embassy wanted to keep putting up with. And I think that just kind of speaks to him being a person who will eventually, if he were granted some asylum by the UK, I think that he would burn some bridges there. That's my 2 second takeaway there. And ultimately, the relationship that Britain and America have, I think, is one of greater cooperation. And Britain is not a country that really values freedom of speech and personal freedoms in general anywhere near to the extent that America does.
Yeah, that's completely understandable, and I tend to agree with what you said there. What about the talk that he may get pardoned or he may get time served? Because, I mean, most people consider the fact that him being in that embassy and being afraid to walk out at the end of it was essentially a prison sentence, knowing that he would be arrested, taken in. Because he's got enemies in more than just here. He's got enemies all
Mm-hmm.
over the world at this point. So it's not just us that wants a piece of him at this point. Do you think he comes over here? And I heard one commenter say that he comes over here, Trump pardons him, and then he can't be extradited anywhere else.
Has has Trump made any public comment about how he thinks Assange should be treated?
I have not seen anything, but that does not mean that he hasn't. I took
Yeah.
some of the information the commenter I was referring to earlier was Limbaugh, of course. So anti-Hillary Limbaugh is completely in Assange's corner right now, but 10 years ago he wasn't.
Hmm. I think a pardon is kind of unlikely. I think that extradition to the U.S. is very likely. I could be wrong. I'm not certainly not going to put any money on that one, but that's my gut.
One thing interesting that I heard about this story when I was listening to the news start happening about that was the fact that Hillary Clinton weighed in on the Assange case and said that Julian Assange needs to be held accountable for his actions against the United States and the world. And that blew my mind, the fact that Hillary Clinton is saying that somebody needs to be held accountable for their actions.
Well, uh, I will say this does fit really well in the vein of me disagreeing with Hillary Clinton, though. So
Yeah.
we're batting a pretty good score there, our average. But uh, I, I disagree. I think that freedom of information is absolutely essential to any kind of a healthy government. DC is so scummy, and it needs light shed on it. And I think we need more whistleblowers, not fewer. And I think that if you're afraid of whistleblowing, I don't think that most of the people who are upset about whistleblowers are upset about it for reasons of national security. I think it has to do with their job security.
Yeah, that's a big thing too that I saw that too. It's always job security. I know people keep saying term limits for Congress people, and I know that having Assange out there kind of pushes that notion a little bit because these people are, for the most part, only worried about going out and getting reelected or whatnot. I don't personally agree with term limits for Congress. I think we should just make it
Mhm.
easier for other people to run so they actually have to stand with their ideas instead of going unchallenged or mostly unchallenged for the idea. But having somebody out there that is whistleblowing is a threat to that idea of everybody getting reelected all the time, I think. And I think you hit the nail on the head right there with that one.
I agree with you when it comes to term limits. I'm not really on that bandwagon of we need congressional term limits. But bringing it back to shedding some light, uh, you know, lies and crime thrive in secrecy,
Hmm.
and there's way too much government secrecy out there, and it just blows my mind after you know Daniel Ellsberg and Edward Snowden, it blows my mind that there's anybody out there who doesn't think that we need more transparency and doesn't applaud, you know, leaking all these scummy secrets.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to having some level of secrecy in the government, especially when it comes to operations that we have going on in here and going on abroad, especially in places where it could put somebody's life at risk. But
Right.
the things that Assange was putting out, especially with the Hillary email, that's not putting people's lives directly at risk. That was showing us the kind of candidate that wanted to run for president. So there again, I'm on the fence about it.
I mean, it's putting people's lives at risk if you take the position that electing Republicans is the end of the world and people are going to be dying because of that. Because there are certainly a lot of people out there who really feel that way.
There
So
are.
if that's your point of view, then yes, anything that exposes corruption or makes corrupt people harder to get elected, yeah, it's a huge crime if that's your point of view.
Oh, people that believe that electing Republicans will mean death and destruction. You have no idea how close to Madison I live. Oh,
Well,
that is a liberal stronghold and a half. I am so glad I don't live there, but it's close enough for comfort here.
I used to live in a little more liberal town, and when I moved up to northern Michigan, where I currently now live, and all of a sudden it wasn't like a public crime to vote conservative. It was really refreshing, and I don't really have any desire to move back to a bigger town.
No, I like my little farming community as well, but every once in a while you have to go into the bigger cities to go to work because there aren't so many jobs in the little towns.
Certainly not in certain industries for sure.
Absolutely.
I work in marketing, and I'm able to find a decent amount of work in these smaller towns, but it would be easier, if I lived somewhere else.
Do you have anything more on Assange, or we can move on to Ilhan because that's a great one that needs to be talked about.
Ilhan, has not been staying out of the news and out of the headlines at all. And to be really honest, it's kind of a nice change of pace because I was really getting bored of talking about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Kind of nice to have somebody different to talk about for a change, even though I think that the topics we're talking about are maybe a little more serious and depressing now.
Well, for the thing with Ilhan, this past week, Ilhan downplayed, I think is the best word that I can put to it, the events of September 11th and the events that happened afterwards. Her
Totally
exact
minimized
quote. What's that?
Totally minimized it.
Yeah, her exact quote was, "Some things happened, and suddenly we were losing our civil liberties." So turn
Some people did some things,
some
she
people. Yeah,
said.
that's right.
Yeah.
And everybody rushed against her, of course, and I may have been in that crowd as well of people that rushed against her, but now the fresh faces ran back to her defense as well. I know what you said, you brought up the fact that we were sick of talking about AOC, but I mean, her, Rashida, and Ilhan seem to be this new little Mean Girls clique up in the House of Representatives.
Uh, so their immediate response, and this is Ilhan, is that talking about what she said and directly quoting her is incitement to violence. That's their official message here of defense for Ilhan, and they are completely pivoting and saying, okay, you should not disagree with Ilhan because disagreeing with her is a threat to her life, which is honestly, even for AOC, this is a step up from, disagreeing with me is racist and sexist. And the crazy thing for me, and it shouldn't be crazy because we live in such a weird reality right now. But the crazy thing to me is that I would really think that the people in the media would be calling this out for what it is, which is ridiculous and a misdirection, and they're not. And it's we really have in America, especially in the media, we have jumped the shark to such a ridiculous level. And I there at this point there now is no depth lower that we can't sink to.
I can't argue with that.
The public discourse here has gotten to a point where the official position of these Democratic leaders is you cannot criticize us no matter what we say. You can't even just directly quote us and say, hey, here's what this person said and I disagree with it. That right there, their message is that's an incitement to violence, and it needs to be shut down with force, by the government. You cannot criticize us.
Well,
they're not even trying to defend her position.
The thing with Omar, and I can actually see where they're going to try and go with this, is it brings it back to what she said in her statement that some people did some things and all of a sudden we were losing our civil liberties. I mean, we all watched this happen back in 2001. I don't know how old you are, but that was my senior year of high school. And I do remember the emails that went around back when we still had email chains and before we had any sort of social media, where that was just what they did, is they were all denouncing Islam, Arabic people, talking about wiping that whole peninsula off the map or turning it into glass. And I see some of these people that are rushing to Ilhan Omar's defense. That's the kind of thing that they're trying to use in order to justify the fact that they are rushing to her defense, is that we did this in the past. I might have been guilty about it. I was 18. My prefrontal cortex hadn't completely developed yet at that point. You do stupid stuff when you're 18 that you might not agree with now, but...
Well, there was an easy out for Ilhan. All she had to do was say, look, I'm not trying to trivialize what happened and minimize what happened on 9/11. The point I was making, and I don't want to disrespect the victims of 9/11 at all, is that there was also Muslims were victimized because they were lumped in with these terrorists. That's a perfectly fine argument to make. It's a pretty valid argument to make.
And I don't begrudge her that either, by the way.
Exactly. Yes, me neither. She had no interest in that, though. She just couldn't take being criticized at all, and she didn't want to walk back her comments, and none of the Democratic Party had any interest in doing that either. Well, and I think that's the broader problem here.
Well, and you keep saying too, it was the call to violence as to the fact that people were disagreeing with her. Donald Trump put up a video of the actual towers being hit and the aftermath that happened after that, and that seemed to be the thing that set everybody in the country off at that point. Yeah, this is a direct call to violence from the president. They're talking about suspending his Twitter account for that, which is never going to happen, by the way, but...
I guess I just fail to see how that's an incitement to violence. It's directly quoting her, juxtaposed with what she was talking about.
What she was downplaying.
Right. It's how is it an incitement to violence for me to take a clip of you and play it next to a clip of what you're talking about, to provide the context and say, hey, here's what he's talking about. Does it line up with what he's saying? I don't think it does. What's your take? How is that an incitement to violence? That is not. It is a shutdown. It's an attempt to shut down any kind of disagreement or speech.
One of the things that's been weird to me about September 11th and all the discussion that's happened with that was the The idea that all we ever talk about is the Twin Towers. And, yes, I will give Donald Trump that same idea because he was probably sitting in Trump Tower. What is that? A mile or two away from the Twin Towers, and he was probably sitting up on the same floor as the planes went into. But we never talk about the fact that another plane went down into a field in Georgia. There was another one that went into the Pentagon, and there was one more, wasn't there?
Well, there was there was a field in Pennsylvania. Then that one was supposed to hit the White House.
Okay, yeah,
And then they hit the Pentagon.
yeah. And we never
So
talk
I think
about
it's
those
4 planes
ones.
total. I mean, not as much as the two that hit the tower, the
Right.
towers for sure.
Which, for the most part, I can agree with that because, there were more people in those towers than there were in any of those other places at the time.
And you said a second ago that you don't begrudge Omar for trying to make the point that there really was an unfair backlash against Muslims.
Yeah,
It's true. It's true, and that's something that is worth talking about. But Omar's comments that trivialize what happened on 9/11. I think the reason that people had a problem with it is because it really framed her viewpoint, which was and which could have been corrected if she had come out and made the statement that I suggested. Her viewpoint seems to be one that doesn't really care about the American victims, or
exactly.
I should say the non-Muslim American victims, and only cared about the unfair side of side
The side effects of it.
victims. Yeah,
Yeah,
side effects on Muslims worldwide and especially living in America. And I think that rubbed people the wrong way because it always has been such a raw, emotional, painful memory for everyone, who saw those towers come down. And I think that's where this backlash is coming from, and that is, in my opinion, why it is a problem that those words are not allowed to be criticized, because I think they should be criticized. They were, it was a very poor point to make, and a very poor way to say it.
deep down to me, it almost depersonifies all the people that died on that day, the way that she put that. And I can understand that from the other direction as well. I grew up in a small town in northern Wisconsin. I had never seen an Arabian person until at least a year after September 11th. I had never ever seen a person from the Middle East in my life. And it was easy, again, with all the emails and all the things that Omar is talking about. It was easy to do that. That's part of the reason that that's part of the reason I'd be willing to hear Omar out at least. But the fact that she's doing the same thing and depersonifying everybody who died in there, because this was no big deal. Just some people did some things. And she's not issuing an apology either. That's the worst part of it. She thinks she's right.
It's the frustrating part of it. I don't know for sure if it's the worst, but it's the part that makes it frustrating. And I think that what you said, that's why it bothers people so much. It does dehumanize, and the fact that she still thinks that she's right, I think is doing more damage than help to the point she was trying to make, which is that yes, there was another wrong that happened here that needs to be addressed. It kind of a little bit reminds me of some of the comments that Colin Kaepernick made, Colin Kaepernick, yeah, the arguments that he was making about police brutality and inequality, there's some benefit to having those conversations. But I think that he did more harm than good to the cause because he rubbed so many people the wrong way and picked some fights that he didn't need to. And I think Ilhan Omar is kind of doing the same thing here.
That's a good point. I never would have thought of that at all to try and put those two together. But yeah, that's completely perfect. Dehumanize anybody that we don't agree with, and then call anybody else out who dehumanizes us, because that was a big thing too. Was I mean, the fresh faces are out there. Oh, Trump is trying to dehumanize us. Well, what do you have to say for the 3,000 people that died in that tower that day? And Cortez, that rubs me the wrong way because, yes, she was, what is she now, 29? Which puts her
29, yeah.
6 years younger than me, which means, okay, she was 11 when it happened. But again, she was right there.
I think that a takeaway from all this is that we should pay attention to our own rhetoric and make sure we're not doing what Omar is doing,
Mm-hmm.
not demonizing and dehumanizing people who disagree with us. I think that's certainly a takeaway that has a lot of value because we do. I do it, and a lot of my conservative and moderate friends do that as well. And so as much as you can, take take lessons from what Omar said. She is a little bit of a mirror of some of us as well. We do kind of do the same thing, go in the opposite direction, and it's not beneficial to either side, no matter who does it.
Well, I don't think I have anything more on this topic here unless you have anything else you want to add.
I'm excited to talk about our 2020 watch and our nice big pool of Democratic candidates.
Yes, we are moving. One of the segments that we always do over here on Ed's World is looking at the fact that we have a presidential election coming up and we get to talk about it. So, we have Beto is in, we have Biden is on the fence, we have Bernie is in. Let's talk 2020. What do you see going on so far?
I think that we can learn a little bit from what happened in the Republican primary in 2015. At that point, we thought that the massive number of Republican candidates was kind of crazy, and now the Democratic primary is shaping up to really dwarf what happened in 2015 for the Republicans. So, what was the outcome of the Republican primary was that there were a lot of really qualified candidates who would normally have appealed to a broad swath of the electorate. And they all competed against each other. You had Marco Rubio is probably one of the biggest examples of someone who probably normally would get a lot bigger chunk of the vote share. And because there were so many people who were pretty similar to him ideologically, Chris Christie, Jeb Bush, Ted Cruz, John Kasich were really very similar, and they fought against each other so much for just a few percentages of the vote that the guy who is the most different and had this loyal following ended up, even if he didn't win huge numbers all the time, he didn't have competition. And the people who were voting for him, they weren't waffling between him and anybody else. And that was, really what drove Trump to take such a huge chunk of the votes overall.
Well,
so
yeah,
I think, go ahead.
it's like Styx always says, we had one person out here who was completely different and who was going to be a money guy versus, and I quote from him, a bunch of war-loving fucking neocons.
It's how many different brands of the same flavor of vanilla, can you choose from here versus, there's one chocolate right here. That one that is the outlier and has that loyal following is going to benefit from all the infighting.
Mm-hmm.
And I think my guess is that in 2024, I think we'll probably see a little more normal sized pool of candidates, because I think after 2 years of seeing what I think we'll see this year, which is that outlier really grabbing a huge chunk, I think people are going to kind of wise up to, oh, it doesn't help us to have such a huge number of candidates in a winner-take-all system.
Who do you think makes the end?
My prediction is still Bernie Sanders. I think that he's not the DNC favorite for sure. Just like Trump was not the RNC favorite. But Bernie Sanders, I think, is going to have probably the most loyal, large block of voters who are not really going to be tempted by anybody else. And I think he's going to really benefit from how many other candidates are competing against each other. And him, it's kind of hard to out Bernie. I think that's going to be a really driving benefit in his favor.
Oh, they sure are trying. So
I think right now, out of our almost 30 candidates that we have, there's really only 6 or 7 people who are really worth talking about. I don't think that Cory Booker or Kirsten Gillibrand are going to go anywhere, beyond 0 or 1% of the vote. I think you got Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, Pete Buttigieg, Elizabeth Warren, Beto O'Rourke, and then I'm also going to throw Stacey Abrams in there. I really think she's probably going to run. I think those 6 or 7 people right there are the only ones who really have any shot of winning at all. And Brady Leonard on No Gimmicks and I, we talk all the time about Biden versus Bernie because he thinks Biden's going to take it. And I don't see that going anywhere. I think Biden's high water mark is a pretty definitive ceiling. I don't think that he's going to go any higher. I think his numbers, once he actually gets out on the campaign trail, I think he's such a blunder-prone person that I don't think he's going to be able to pull it out. I think that he's kind of the Jeb Bush of 2019, 2020. Somebody you got really high expectations for, and is kind of the target for everybody else, and just doesn't actually deliver any real solid numbers. The one thing that he does really have going for him is he doesn't have to fundraise as much as everybody else, because Joe Biden is probably the person that the big checks are going to come rolling in for. Outside of Biden, the big money is really only going to Bernie. Kamala Harris is pulling some pretty impressive numbers. Pete Buttigieg is pulling some surprisingly good numbers for how much of pretty much an unknown he was until super recently. Mm-hmm. And then Elizabeth Warren is really the only other person who really has any kind of money. And that right there, once any kind of primaries start trickling in, money is going to be hugely important. So the people who haven't been able to raise very much are going to be the ones who start dropping like flies really early on.
Well, dropping like flies rather is a really interesting transition there, because I put it in the show notes. just based on statistics and what you see from studying this, we've talked about who's going to get in, who's still going to get in, and who's already in. Who do you think is going to be the first one to drop out?
Oh gosh, I mean that requires me to remember who all is in. Uh, uh, I guess actually, Amy Klobuchar. I think she's a smart enough gal. I don't think she's running to win. I think she's running because she wants some name recognition. Maybe wants to be considered for some cabinet positions. Maybe. I think that she's going to uh, probably be one of the first people to duck out. Um, once the money really dries up, because, uh, like I said, the people I mentioned are really the only ones who are bringing in the money, and I think Klobuchar is not one of the really deluded candidates who are going to pull John Kasich and stay in way too long. Although Cory Booker probably will.
So one of the things that I notice, because occasionally I'll go down to the other side of the aisle, especially when I'm listening to podcasts, because I think it's important for us to know what the other side is thinking, what they're going to bring forward, and just what kind of a message they are selling to their fans. I noticed almost immediately the fact when I was listening to Pod Save America a few weeks ago that they were doing an awful lot of talking about what Elizabeth Warren is going to do in the campaign trail. Now, she was just in the news at the time when I was listening to that with her idea to break up social media companies, but the way that they talked really made me think. I know that the superdelegate system was why we got Hillary Clinton versus
Mm-hmm.
Bernie, or rather than Bernie in the first place for 2016.
Right.
My question to you is: do you think they have somebody coronated already, and who do you think it is? Because it sounds to me from listening to their side that they may have already coronated Elizabeth Warren.
Probably a little bit early uh, to make that kind of a call. Warren is probably high up on the list. I don't think they probably have picked their person yet. I think that they would really like Joe Biden. Joe Biden is probably one of the most electable in the general election. Definitely appeals more to never Trump or Republicans and moderates than a lot of the other candidates, and that was a big part of why the DNC fought so hard to kill off Bernie's campaign in 2016, because they knew that he really was not an electable person at that point in time. And so I think that being their motivator, you got to look at who that translates to now. Joe Biden is one of them. Elizabeth Warren is probably high on their list. I think the other name would be Kamala Harris. I think Kamala Harris is she's pretty moderate compared to the larger Democratic party as a whole right now. She's kind of more on the moderate side. She definitely has some charisma, and a lot of people compare her to Obama. So I don't think it's out of the question to say that Kamala is probably one of their early favorites as well.
I am most interested in listening to Kamala get onto the debate stage with a Republican, not even just Trump, but any Republican, because if you look at California's stacked primary system, you have to remember Kamala Harris has never run for or against a Republican for anything in her life, not on state side and not in the Senate either. So this would be a first for her to run against somebody who actually opposes her.
So, maybe something to keep in mind would be which candidates have had to compete against Republicans in the past.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think, which senators. I mean, Indiana is a pretty red state. Pete Buttigieg is, the mayor of, I think, South Bend, Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he probably has a lot of experience working with, elected Republicans, as well as trying to appeal to Republican voters. Um, I mean, Joe Biden is probably higher on that list as well. Most of the senators I can think of who are running, come from pretty blue states. Even some of the representatives like um, Beto O'Rourke. He's probably higher on that list too because of coming from Texas and running against Ted Cruz. Uh, Almost made it. I don't think that Beto O'Rourke is really a very serious candidate, and probably won't be taken very seriously by the DNC.
But he raised $12 million in 24 hours.
You know, uh, it's pretty crazy looking at, if you add up all the money that has gone to various candidates so far, their numbers are not really bad compared. If you look at how many people they are running all at once, if you compare their numbers versus numbers from previous years, their numbers really are not that bad. And they're most of them, most of the top few Democrats that I mentioned are not super far behind Donald Trump, who's the only presidential candidate, Republican, who's running.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't have any competition from within his party. And most of the Democratic candidates are not super far behind, maybe by.
I want to talk a bit more about this particular candidate because it was so fresh on my last episode, and I've done a solo video about this already, but I'm always curious to see what other people think about the ideas that especially this particular one, was putting forward. And that would be one of the latest additions to the field, that dickhead, Eric Swalwell.
I don't know why he's running. I really don't. I don't think that he really thinks he has any chance of winning. He doesn't meet any of the intersectional points that a lot of the Democratic voters are looking for. They don't really want another white guy, white wealthy guy, running for president. And they've already got Bernie and Biden and Beto. I don't know why he's running. He can't possibly think that he has any chance of winning.
Wait, hold on. You say he doesn't meet any of the criteria, but he took a selfie in front of Trump Tower to say that he was going somewhere else for a cup of coffee.
Well, then in that case, if that's his angle, he's really going to have to compete with Kirsten Gillibrand and Elizabeth Warren, who are very vocal Trump opponents. If his angle is I'm the harshest on Trump, he's got some stiff competition there too. Eric Swalwell, to me, he's like Tim Ryan Part 2. Why did Tim Ryan jump in? Why did Eric Swalwell jump in? Who's next? I mean, is Tim Kaine going to jump back in now too? I mean, how many more white male members of Congress are going to jump in here and compete against each other for 0.1% of the vote?
Well, the thing with Swalwell, too, is, I mean, nobody knew who he was all across the country. We knew who Warren was. We knew who Bernie was. We knew who Biden was. But nobody knew who Swalwell was across the country until that
Unless you're really active on Twitter.
Yeah. Until that fateful day where he decided to say, "It'll be a short war, my friend. The government has nukes."
Well, in that case, let me tell you who else he's competing with for, to be the most goof and gaff prone candidate. Joe Biden probably has him beat. I mean, it's hard to out goof and gaff Joe Biden. So Eric Swallow is just more of the same. No matter which aisle he tries to run down, he's got so much competition. Really, he is only pretty much running on gun control, and maybe that's enough in the Democratic Party, to really get people's attention. I don't think it is. I think that everybody who's running are going to toe the party line about how badly we need gun control. He's probably going to be the only person who's going to suggest using nukes against American citizens.
I can't believe he ran after making that. I can believe he got reelected after that, but I can't believe he decided he was going to run for president after that. I mean, he's got to know that we've all got these images stored up of that we can all just dump out onto Twitter whenever he puts an ad up.
How is it crazier, though, than Beto O'Rourke and Stacey Abrams wanting to run literally the year after they lost their only big campaign?
That's a fair point.
There's again, Eric Swalwell doesn't really stand out in any area except for probably being the only candidate to threaten American citizens with nukes. It's probably the only area he stands out as being at all unique.
I thought Stacey Abrams won. They just wouldn't give it to her.
That's, if you asked her, that's what she'd say. I'm surprised that she hasn't changed her name on Twitter to Governor Stacey Abrams. She should do that. If she's really going to sell this, she needs to sell it whole hog and just go around calling herself the governor.
So, not necessarily statistically who you think is going to make it through there, because we talked about that already. If statistics be damned, who do you want to see on the debate stage against Donald Trump?
I think we'll get probably the most entertaining debate would come probably. I'm going to put Tulsi Gabbard pretty high on the list because she is such a fascinating person. But I think if you had Joe Biden or Beto O'Rourke on the stage opposite Donald Trump, you'd get some really fascinating debates because Joe Biden and Donald Trump probably would get into a fist fight. We'd have these two geriatric candidates up there collaborating each other with their, tennis ball covered walkers. And Beto O'Rourke would ride out onto the stage on his skateboard, and then try and play a saxophone a la Bill Clinton to try and convince everybody of just how cool he is. So I think those two guys would probably be the most interesting out of the whole line of candidates. But I will say, it has been a dream of mine ever since we were still chest deep in the 2015 primaries. I've always wanted to see Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump on the same stage together because I really want to see what Trump would say and what his attack lines would be. I think that would be absolutely fascinating. I've always wanted to see that.
Last question before we move out of this segment. Hillary, in or out?
She finally came out and said she's not running, even though a bunch of times before that she said she was still considering it. I think Hillary has one thing that most of these other candidates don't, and that's a little bit of brains. She knows when there's no chance, for her to have any kind of success. A lot of other candidates really should take a page out of her book and realize it's time to sit this one out.
Well, with that and the topic you were looking most forward to, now we move into the topic I was looking most forward to. In a tweet this past week, Donald Trump expressed his desire to possibly let the illegal immigrants stay, but he has to bus them over to sanctuary cities who actually want them. Now, most of us agreed when this first happened that this was just a troll and there was nothing that was serious behind it. But then things started to get serious behind it, and he actually started citing laws and was it the director of ICE said that this was actually illegal? Somebody had said that this was actually illegal, and I cannot think for the life of me who it was, but they may
I
actually
did
be
hear.
seriously thinking about this. So, go ahead.
Well, Sarah Sanders did come out and say that this is a serious option they have on the table. I mean, I'm going to call their bluff. They're not actually going to do this. Is my, that's my opinion. I think that it is a very effective maneuver to get the voters who live in those cities to kind of reconsider. Okay, if we actually put our money where our mouth is this a roller coaster we really want to ride? And I think it's going to be a big, and it's already a big wake up call. I mean, Cher tweeted out a very Republican immigration stance. She's like, look, I want to support these people. Probably can pull up her actual tweet here. But she's like, my city is already not doing enough to take care of its own people. I think this is here it is. Here's her actual tweet. She said, "I understand helping struggling immigrants, but my city, Los Angeles, isn't taking care of its own. What about the 50,000 plus citizens? She says, who live on the streets, people who live below the poverty line and are hungry. If my state can't take care of its own, many are vets. How can it take care of more?" I think one thing that's effective about this maneuver is getting people on a larger scale to understand that the debate is not about immigrants. It's about illegal immigrants who are not benefiting the country and who are actually a burden on our welfare systems, who are a burden to law enforcement. Kind of helping reframe that argument back to the points that conservatives are actually trying to make here. And, not just having the whole conversation always be about, oh, Republicans are racist and that's why they hate immigrants. If you actually put your money where your mouth is, if we're talking about where you live at home, you get a big difference. And there's, who's the, I think it's there's a senator. There's somebody in Congress who was all for wind power until he found out that they wanted to put these turbines up, these windmills, out by his property, and that he's going to have these ugly windmills all over his beautiful view. And all of a sudden, he starts voting against, these wind power bills. When this is one of the things that makes small government more effective, is that when you're actually looking at stuff that affects your life, you treat it differently than when it's about other people. So again, I really don't think that the administration is seriously going to do this, but in putting out this bluff of his own, he's calling out some of the BS and the bluffing of proponents of these sanctuary cities. And I think it's one of the smarter moves that this administration has tried to make.
Well, the thing with it that happened too is, again, it goes back to the people in Congress who are suddenly opposed to that. One of the first people that came out, one of the first people they were talking about when they talked about all of this was Nancy Pelosi, and the fact that this was going to affect her, and she was actually against the idea of busing them out into there. Which, I mean, you can put the tinfoil on and say, hey, okay, maybe this is a conspiracy to get the illegal immigrants in so they move to largely red districts and change the voting dynamics. We don't know. But, yeah, Pelosi was one of the bigger targets that get stepped up on into this. And honestly, I think would this change her mind, first off?
I mean, this seems to have already changed her mind a bit. I think the problem here is that the Democrats are already spinning up their new narrative here. And their narrative is, no, we're opposed to this because it is dehumanizing these illegal immigrants. And if you're saying, "Oh, we're going to bust them to sanctuary cities and make you pay by having them come live with you," well, that's dehumanizing them, and that is treating them like a threat. That's already their new line. To which I say, okay, let's call their bluff and actually start trucking them in there.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
see how it starts affecting their cities, because it does have a huge financial impact on on the welfare systems and the safety nets that we have in place that are meant for citizens. And this is the whole reason why conservatives are concerned, is because the safety net systems that we have in place don't work when they're overburdened. And I think that the people who live in these sanctuary cities are going to see that really quickly if this were to actually happen. I don't think Trump is going to do it, but I kind of wish he would.
I think he's going to do it.
Do you?
The more I hear DHS talk about it, the more I hear him talk about it, the more I hear Sarah Sanders talk about it, I think he's going to do it.
I'd like to see it. I'd like to see it. Make them put their money where their mouth is. Make them feel the pinch of the legislation that they are constantly fighting for. Look, if you want this so badly, fine. You have to actually live with it. So let's actually put it on you, and make you experience what you're trying to force on everybody else.
Hollywood's favorite Democrat mouthpiece, who I can't remember the last thing that she worked in, you retweeted this from me, actually. That's great. Decided that she was one of the people that wanted to weigh in on this. And of course, I'm talking about everybody's favorite former witch, Alyssa Milano, who has been screeching many of the same things that you were saying, that this is dehumanizing, that this is bad, that this is a trick. That's been the big one for me, was the fact that so many people are saying this is a trick. What did you think of that when I put that out there? And especially got to call her Phoebe, because, I can't remember her as anything else. Can you?
Man, I'm too young to remember Milano as anything except for a really annoying vocal Twitter account. I have her muted actually on Twitter because I get really frustrated seeing her tweets. But every once in a while, I'll if somebody's somebody who whose opinion I really like is talking about something she said, I'll go check it out. I think that the reason that they're doing this, and Alyssa Milano is certainly an effective voice. The reason they're doing this is because it does work. It does work to reframe these things. It's, like we were just talking about earlier in the show with Ilhan Omar, the framing, criticism of Omar's comments as incitement to violence, it works. The spin that the media and that celebrities put on any of these issues, it works almost every time. So, as far as it being a trick, it could be a trick. I'm kind of the kind of in the camp that it's a little bit of a bluff. I would like to see this happen, like you're saying. That it would be nice.
Yeah, it would be. I'd go back and get my CDL again and go down there and start driving the buses.
Well, there would be certainly no end to the amount of work that you could pull in. Because they're just going to keep moving sanctuary cities, because most of them are total crap fests. You look at San Francisco, not a super nice place to live, especially on the streets. So a lot of them are gonna go right back where they came from, and they'll just have to get trucked right back to the sanctuary cities again.
I think it's funny. That was one of the highlights of my week, to see that this tweet was out there. Just to see that they're going to do something else. One of the things that I think was most threatening about Trump when he came into the was he was saying a lot of the same things that a lot of people have been saying for years as campaign promises. But the fact of the matter is he's serious about getting them done, leaving them with nothing else to campaign on after he gets all of this stuff done. And he's serious about making steps like that to do it. So,
Well, let me just say I liked that you took Alyssa Milano's words and pointed them back at her. Your exact quote was, "How is it sick?" So her tweet, she was quoting this Washington Post article. She says, "This is so sick and twisted." Detainees. You words back on her and said, "How is it sick and twisted?" And unless you think there's something wrong with them.
yeah, that's exactly the point, too.
Calling her and Democrats out their double is because it kind of exposes that the emperor has no clothes. A lot of the Democratic spokesmen are not speaking from compassion or love. They're speaking from political opportunity. They recognize that this is a point where they can garner some sympathy and loving, and if you actually force them to, they practice what they preach, it pulls back the curtain on, who they are, and you see this a lot anytime you run a Republican candidate who is a woman or who is black. You see the most hateful comments ever directed at those people from Democrats. Really sexist, racist comments directed at these people because they don't fall in line with your political values. The people who fall into these intersectional coalitions, or the points of the intersectional coalition, only matter to Democrats if they also toe the line and do what they're told. And so, in a case like this, where you have an opportunity, where Donald Trump has an opportunity to force Democrats to actually practice what they preach, it's great because it's going to expose them for what they really are, which is not someone who wants illegal immigrants living in their neighborhood.
And, well, that's what I have onto that here. It looks like we might be running up against the clock here, but there's one last topic that I wanted to make sure that we got to, just so I could actually have a sounding board and listen to somebody else express some ideas on this as well. The reporting came out initially that Nielsen had a meeting with Donald Trump last week Sunday, about 8 days ago at this point, and afterwards she turned in her resignation. We still don't know entirely what happened in that meeting, and I suspect that for the next 20 years, only Nielsen and Trump are going to know exactly what happened in that meeting and whether or not she quit or she was fired. But one of the concerns that I had when I started watching this was reading some of the articles. When I made my video on this, I was actually going to report on the fact that she was out at DHS. I didn't know I was going to go down the rabbit hole of what the people thought of her and what the people thought her future was going to be, but that seems to be the most important story onto this, is what people are going to want to do to Nielsen, and what that might mean for the rest of us as well, because it's really Orwellian. It's really scary. Have you seen any of this at all?
It's not a story I've been following super closely. I'm curious to hear what you mean by it's Orwellian.
The first article that I saw when I Googled Nielsen, and I actually put my Google results up on the video when I put up there, was cancel Kirstjen Nielsen. One of the common themes that I saw throughout the same story, and it's really weird because for the most part, all of the outlets were putting out the same story over and over again, changing one word here or there. But they seem to have almost the same text, is that they just wanted to make sure that Nielsen didn't go out and ever get another job again, and they wanted to put financial pressure, social pressure, on any university, any security firm, or any law firm that would ever hire her again. And that's just worrisome to me.
Well, I would agree. I certainly don't like hearing that. I mean, it's a little bit different from what usually happens when someone is out at in the Trump administration. If they, especially if they're explicitly fired, they usually pretty quickly become Democratic heroes.
Hmm.
So this is a little bit different. I'm not really sure why the hatred is there for her, other than that she was in charge of DHS.
Well, she was the person that
But
was putting the kids in cages. Directly,
yeah,
she was going
allegedly.
and grabbing the kids and putting them in there.
The big problem here is that if they don't get bored and forget about her, and they do actually go ahead and take this, as far as it can go, and prevent her from making a living anywhere else, what she's gonna do, what she's gonna have to do, is go ahead and try and become a media darling, a la James Comey or someone like that, and try and speak out and expose Trump, because there is money in that. There's a lot of money in that. So, I mean, the things that Democrats do are effective, and bullying is very effective. It has been time and time again. It's unfortunate. It's disgusting, really.
It's interesting to hear you call it bullying because that's a term that we haven't heard very much since the Parkland shooting. To be completely honest, all the celebrities stopped their anti-bullying campaigns, but that's the most accurate term that I can think of to use what the Democrats are doing to all of these Trump people. They're bullying them, and that's not okay by me. But to take it a step further, and one of the things that actually concerns me about the fact that this is happening is, I mean, Nielsen is a lawyer herself, but she's also a woman of means. She had a good salary for a year and a half, and she's probably got something tucked away. Plus, the security clearances that she had before, the security work that she's done. This is not a poor woman. This is not like I went into the Trump administration. So she's got the means to defend herself throughout this, and I feel that there are going to be some lawsuits that the news isn't going to cover over this. But if they can do this to somebody that has the means to this, what's to stop them from turning that on all of the rest of us, especially Trump voters or Republican voters? Because, there are some of us who aren't on the Trump train yet. He doesn't have my vote earned for 2020 yet.
The problem is that Democrats really feel that these people who are being targeted, they feel they deserve it. They feel that Nielsen deserves this because she is so evil, because she put little kids in cages, and so how can you have any sympathy for someone like that? They need to be ostracized. I don't see a solution to that is simpler than healing some of the divides in this country, because they were bad in 2008.
Mm-hmm.
They're a lot worse now every day. We have to tone the rhetoric. The problem is that inflammatory rhetoric is effective, and I don't see a solution, because you're not going to convince Democrats that someone like Nielsen doesn't deserve to be treated like this. Anybody that they hate, anybody that they feel is an evil person, they're going to do this to. They do it over and over again.
They do, absolutely.
I don't see an easy. There's, we need to be unified. Abe Lincoln, long time ago, spoke to the division in the country, how damaging it is.
And that was a lot worse back then too, because I mean they made two separate countries about it.
Yeah, uh, it's part of human nature, and what we've seen in the past is a lot of times, we reunify either because of a leader who does a good job bringing people together, because of an outside threat, another country that is, trying to attack us. I don't want war for sure. I'm just saying it's one of the things that has united in the past. Everybody recognizes that the harsh divides in our country really hurt us, and really you've got neighbor pitted against neighbor. You've got family reunions that you dread because you don't want to talk to your brother because he voted for somebody different than you.
Mm-hmm. You can't hang out with some of your old friends in the bar anymore because you vote the wrong way.
Yeah.
I've got an example of that in my life. Somebody who was really dear to me won't talk to me even if we're out with a group of friends anymore because I voted the wrong way.
It's sad, and it needs to change. And I think that we need to all work on how we talk about our political opponents, and including and especially me. I way too often I demonize people who disagree with me, and it doesn't help anything. It hurts our country. And we've talked a number of times, tonight about dehumanizing, depersonifying various people, and this is what they're doing with Nielsen here. Mm-hmm. They are dehumanizing her, and they're reducing her to saying, "Look, she did something politically that we don't agree with. She, in our view, she's a hateful person because of her role in separating families at the border here." And this, dehumanizing, depersonifying is a tactic that both sides use. I think the Democrats right now, it's kind of their favorite go-to move. And this is probably the third or fourth topic that it has been relevant to. Mm-hmm. And it's scary too, because it can happen to you. It can happen to anybody.
That was the point that I made in my video, is what happens when they turn around and point this at us, you and me on the ground, especially you and me that actually speak out publicly against this and put it on the internet. I mean, are we next?
I have a young friend who, she's a Latina and a lesbian, and she recognized when we were talking recently that there is a political belief that she holds that she can be demonized for by the left. If you're a lesbian Latina and you are the Democrats' enemy, mm-hmm. anybody can be the Democrats' enemy. If a progressive, a liberal Latina lesbian is not left-wing enough, then who is?
Well, they're turning this on Barack Obama too now.
Yeah, they are really trying to distance themselves from Obama. And that's another reason why I think Joe Biden probably is not going to do so well, is because the left is moving on from Obama. He's too right-wing for them. He was too moderate and too nice. Mm-hmm. And so they don't want, they didn't want Hillary, and they don't really want Joe Biden either, probably.
Well, the progressives are scary too, because, I mean, being as close to Madison as I am, I've been down there. I've engaged with discussions with people that I didn't really want to get into, but the fact of the matter, they came out. I've heard directed to me somebody tell me that Bernie Sanders is a right-wing extremist.
Come on, you're making that up.
No, that actually happened. He's too right wing for them.
I have another friend who is an elderly woman who is a lesbian, and she has been fighting for feminism and LGBT rights and equality literally her entire life since she was 18 or 19,
Hmm.
and she's got to be close to 70 now, 60,
Wow.
70, and she's out. She is too right wing for the Democrats because when it came to the transgender bathroom issue, her take was, all right, I care about these people, but as a woman, I also need to feel safe, and this doesn't make me feel safe. And that was a too hateful and right wing of a position, and she's out. She is kind of shunned and ostracized by a lot of her left wing friends. The left, there is no limit to how far left the left are going to go, and they always eat their own eventually when you aren't willing to keep going further and further with them.
That's a really dark place to end the show on. But I do have the counter to that, and I actually forgot to put it in the notes. But if you've seen a previous episode, or the fact that you are associated with Brady Leonard, you probably know what's coming here because when we end the show, we always try to go out on a positive note. So I always like to ask the guests about themselves one more time. Because politics is so divisive, I always want to know what is one hobby that has nothing to do with works or politics that you have out there. It could be a video game that you're playing, a book that you read, a new album that you picked up, just something positive to take the show out on.
There's two things I've been really excited about lately. The first is I've been listening to some new music, digging into some new kind of EDM, dubstep, type music, and really just kind of falling in love with it again. That was a big thing for me in high school, and took a lot of years off, but from listening to that. But really been appreciating that a lot lately. And then the other thing is, I really find zombies and the apocalypse to be just a really fun uh, genre of literature and movies and video games. Um, and I've just lately really been getting back into zombies again. It's just it's just something fun and unrefined about the whole zombie apocalypse idea. But always just really gotten a big kick out of that, and a little bit of an adrenaline junkie, so I kind of like being scared too.
Anything specific that you've been watching that you recommend, or
Actually, I've been playing Call of Duty Black Ops 4 a little bit, and one of their really big kind of fan favorite zombie maps that they had was on Alcatraz Island. You'd play in the prison, but it was taken over by zombies, and they've revisited that a couple of times in this new game, and they've even made it into a battle royale map.
wow.
Just it's kind of fun to be you're fighting other people, and then zombies can come out of nowhere and attack you, and it's I don't know, it's just kind of fun. It just kind of adds to the adrenaline rush of the whole thing.
Well, with that, I'm going to take us out of here. Thanks again for coming by and having this conversation with us. Uh, Make sure to the audience, again, if you've watched this on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe button if you like what you see. Make sure you check out JJ's stuff. He'll get a chance to plug this here in just a sec. And again, if you're listening to this on the audio platforms, make sure you leave us a good review. Make sure you subscribe and leave us a 5-star rating on Apple. That helps us move up the charts. JJ, why don't you plug your social media again before we get out of here?
Well, thanks for having me on the show again. It's really been a fun conversation. And anybody who's interested in talking to me can follow me on Twitter at JJ Lahey, Lahey. I'd like to talk about football, video games, movies, and especially politics. So I'm kind of a fun person to talk to. So go ahead and follow me on there and shoot me a message. Let me know what you think.
And as always, remember, never take the words of bloggers, podcasters, or journalists as gospel. Find all the facts and draw your own conclusions. JJ, you have the last word for the night.
I guess I just want to kind of revisit again just this idea of kind of being mindful of what we say and not dehumanizing the opposition, because it's definitely something that I need to work on. And at the end of the day, there's a lot more that should unite us than divide us. So just hope that can be a takeaway for some people who are really passionate and care a lot and can get carried away.
Well, thanks for that. Take care, everyone.